Hey guys, so here's what I'm working with. I got a 1985 K10 square body I'm working on. So I got an LS engine installed in it. And I didn't go with a donor harness or anything. What I did, I bought this standalone harness off of eBay. There's some information here. And I'm not a YouTuber or anything, but I do want to share some lessons I learned through this process. So I got the standalone harness here. It is drive-by-wire, as it states there. And I also have wired the truck with the Speedway Motors 22 circuit wiring kit. And that's the part number there. So I got the instructions for both here. I just want to walk you through some of the wiring issues I had while setting this up. So the standalone wiring harness has a two fuse relay center. And the problem was when I tried to crank the truck after I got everything wired up, I got a no start. So look at the instructions in the back and it tells you what to do in the event of a no start. So the red ignition wire on the back of that two fuse relay center has to have 12 volts when the key is on and cranking. And it says this cannot be stressed enough. Most no start conditions can be traced to this wiring issue. And that was exactly the case. So what I did, I put a meter on the back of that ignition wire, that little small red ignition wire that goes from the ignition to the back of that relay box, and turned the key on, had 12 volts. When I started to crank the truck, the 12 volts dropped off to, I don't know, 0, 1 or 2 volts or whatever it was. Not enough to start the truck. So with that temporary loss of voltage, the truck wouldn't start. All right, so digging through here, I was looking for alternatives. Now, some people on YouTube has built some type of capacitor that stores 12 volts long enough to cover that drop off during cranking. I'm not doing all that. So what I did, I looked through here and I found this wire here on the Speedway Motors kit. It's wire 3A. And what the original use of this wire is for engines with a distributor. It runs that wire to the distributor, ties that in, gives the distributor power. So I come to the conclusion that what makes the most sense in my head is that wire can be used to run to that relay. So, and it gives me what I need. It gives me the 12 volts with the key on, and it gives me the constant 12 volts as I'm cranking. It is a fused wire, so that's what I did. I run it to that relay, cranked it up, had no problems. That fixed that particular issue. So I hope that helps. Maybe I can give you some visuals here. So that's the relay. One's for cranking the ignition and one's for the fuel pump. And then it has some fuses there for other things. Let's see. Here's the underdash wire. So that's the red wire that was initially tied into the back of that relay. Ignition feed relay center. And it says there, 12 volt switch power on and cranking. For whatever reason, I don't quite understand why I was losing that 12 volts while I was cranking, but it's something to do with the way my ignition's wired or whatever. All right, so if you look under here, this is where I'm gonna mount it, under the dash here. That's what it looks like. This right here is where my thumb is, this wire here. That's where the initial small little bitty wire was initially to feed that relay. And what I did is put a 14 gauge wire there, which is wire 3A, excuse me, wire 3A ignition feed. I highly recommend the Speedway Motors 22 circuit wiring kit. I've heard a lot of good things about it. I've heard a lot of good things about the painless wiring. It was basically a coin toss of which one I decided to go with. I think I was able to get this one a couple of days quicker than the painless wiring, so this is probably the one I went with because of that reason. Anyway, all the wires are labeled every few inches. I think it's like every 6 inches. And then of course you have 3 or 4 pages here, front and back, explaining where all of these wires go. Man, it's been real easy. There's been a couple little run-ins that I've had. Just some lessons learned, and if I would have read these instructions line by line, I would have, answered a lot of questions, but I'm so scatterbrained, as you can tell by the way I'm talking in this video, that I just jump all over the place. But I'm kind of figuring these things out a little at a time. One other thing that, excuse me, that same relay here. So next to the ignition relay, we have the fuel pump relay. So I run my, it had the ground and the signal wire from the PCM already into the made up to the relay. I'm sorry if you can't see. So I had to run the constant power from the battery and also I had to run the fuel pump wire. I had to tie that into the back of the relay. I guess they leave that up to you to run it how you see fit. So anyway, I turned the key on, heard the fuel pump kick on after I wired it up, and then it kicked off after, I don't know, a second or two. I went and looked at my fuel pressure, didn't have any fuel pressure, so it didn't run long enough to pressure up, so it's not running off of a pressure switch. Maybe it's just a timer, not quite sure. Something in the computer telling it to turn on for a second or two and then turn off for whatever reason. I would have thought it would have stayed on when I turned the key on, because it is it does circulate back into the tank. It's got a fuel pressure regulator. I think it's set at 58 psi. All right, so let me take you back here. All right, so had everything wired up like I wanted it. All my fuel lines are AN fittings. I run all my lines. What I want to be able to do is I have this valve here, a T, and if I want to, I'd like to be able to open this valve with the fuel pump on. Truck does not have to be on. It needs to be off for this, really. And I want to be able to fill up a gas tank, a fuel tank, or fill up my lawnmower, or if somebody's on the side of the road, whatever. I can have a long enough hose here where I can just pump directly from my tank to a vehicle or to the lawnmower. Well, I can't do that if that relay kicks it off, or the computer kicks that fuel pump off after a second with the truck off. So what I did, because I want to be able to run that fuel pump without the truck running. So what I did, here's the wire that goes back to the fuel pump. This is the hot wire, the constant hot wire here that goes to the relay. The relay gets the signal to give power to the fuel pump. And what I did, I have this wire here. Oh, got confused there. I have this wire here that I tied into this line going to this switch right here. Just a hot switch. hit that switch, and it gives power to the fuel pump. And I'm sure it's back feeding into this relay. I don't know if it's hurting anything. It shouldn't hurt anything. I guess the only thing it would hurt is, I don't know. It hadn't hurt anything so far. It hadn't blown any fuses or burned up anything on my computer that I'm aware of. I'm gonna test this signal wire here. Okay, so testing that, I have 0 volts going back to the computer. So that means, that's telling me that the relay is still open. It hasn't closed, and I can't backfeed power 12 volts back to the computer. So I think that's good. I shouldn't have any problems being able to do that. All of my wiring, I solder anything like this. I solder. I also have the soldering / shrink wrap. Though it's got the little solder bands in them. And then once all that's done and closed up, I run another heat shrink wrap band on the wires. So good tight connections, soldered connections, double soldered connections, and heat shrink wrapped. So shouldn't have any electrical issues there. Every one of my wires have done like that. Anyway, hope this helps. Hope y'all are able to, if you run into this issue, or hope this saves you some time here, you come across my video. All right. Thanks, guys. Bye.